Welcome to Gospel Worship Academy. Today we're going to go over inversions. We're going to go over explaining what they are and how we can use them in our songs. So what is an inversion? Let's look at an example of what an inversion is. Today we're going to be in the key of C. Okay, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. So here's an example of when an inversion can be useful in our playing. Okay, so let's play the C major chord. Okay, so what's another way to play the C major chord? So here's another way, right? So you can move down the piano. You can move up and down the piano, which is great. But that gives you a pretty similar sound. So what if you wanted to sound a little bit different, right? So that's the benefit of an inversion. An inversion gives you another way to play the C major chord. So what do I mean by that? So here's the root position of the C major chord. So an inversion means that these letters in the C major, the C, E, G, inversion means that they can be in any order. Okay, so what does that mean? So that means that, well, this is C here in the right hand. So where's another C on the keyboard? Okay, so C is also here on the left side, right? And on the right side, where's another C? Okay, so there's also another C here. Great. So an inversion means that you can actually put any of these letters, the C, E, G, in any different order. Okay, so we will now invert the C major chord, meaning we will move the lowest note here, C, to the top of the chord, and then put it to the right side or higher in pitch. Okay, so here's another place to, so in other words, invert C and put it up here. All right. So in other words, the letters are now in different order. So now the lowest note in the chord is E. And let's listen to that sound. And then now we can say this is the first inversion because it's the first time we inverted the C major chord, right? So since this is the first time we inverted the C major chord, this is why when we move C to the top of the chord, this is why we call it first inversion. All right. Great. So now we can actually invert the E as well. Remember, any of these letters can be in any different order. So now to create a different sound again of the C major chord, if you like this chord, but you want to see if is there another way you can create a C major chord, you can invert the chord again. All right, let's try that. So in the keyboard, where is another spot that you see the letter E? All right, so you can play E here. Also, you can play E up here. All right, so let's invert it and move E from the bottom of the chord to the top of the chord. Okay, so does this chord have a C? Yes, it does. Does it have an E? Yes, it does. Does it have a G? Yes, it does. So that's why this is also another way to play the C major chord. And this is called the second inversion because this is the second time we have inverted the chord. Okay, now G. So now as we see here, G is at the bottom of the chord. Okay, great. So if we actually inverted the chord one more time, guess what? We're actually going to end back home to the root of the chord. So in other words, if you put G now from the bottom to the top of the chord, we're now back in the root position of the C major chord. Okay, so let's run through that again very slowly. So C major chord. This is root position because C is at the bottom of the chord. Okay, C is the lowest note in the chord. Again, this is called root. To invert it, we will move C to the top of the chord now. This is first inversion. To invert it again, we'll move E to the top. All right, and then to go back home to the root position, we'll invert G to now the top of the chord again. So this is usually called root position C major chord, first inversion, second inversion, root position C major chord. Okay. All right. Now, so again, what's the benefit of an inversion? An inversion again gives you more options to play, like C here, 3 different ways. Okay. Just to keep it simple, that's one of the benefits of using an inversion. So if you're playing a song like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Doesn't that get boring? So if so, you can actually try a different sound using inversion. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe the second time you try and invert, use the first inversion. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe you want to add you want another sound on the 1. So then you can even use the second inversion here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Even as you're playing the chord, you can actually move through the inversion. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. Okay. Just to add more interest in your playing. That's one of the benefits of using an inversion. Okay. Now, so that's just on the C major chord or the 1 chord. Inversions can be used on any chord. So what that means is that even on the 2 chord, the D minor chord, we can play the D minor now instead of just one way in the root position only, where we're limited, right? So instead of being limited in it being able to play the D minor chord in only the root position, we can now play the D minor, the 2 chord, in 3 different ways. Okay, so let's run through that real quick. So this is the D minor in root position. If we invert it, we'll now put the D. Well, first of all, let's figure out what are the notes in the chord D minor. So there's a D, there's an F, and there's an A. Okay, so that means if you want to invert the chord, that means you can put any of these letters in any order. Okay, so to do that, we'll now move D to the top. Look at that. Great. So now this is the first inversion. This is root position because whenever the root of the chord is the lowest note, so D in this case is the lowest, then that's called root position. Okay. When we invert it, then this is the first inversion. When we invert it the second time and put F now at the top, this is our second inversion. Okay. And let's invert again to go back to our root position. Great. So as you're seeing here, we can invert 3 times for each chord. So that's on the 2. All right. And then for E, it's the same deal here. We figure out what's the letter in E. So in the E minor chord, E, G, B. So this is the root position. Invert it and put E up here. Okay. All right. Let's invert it again. Put G up here. All right. And let's invert it again and put B at the top of the chord. This is E minor. So what about the F major chord? Okay, let's do that. So F, here's another F here. Okay. This is the first inversion. This is the root position of F. First inversion. Invert it. Second time, put A at the top. Great. And then this is the second inversion of F. And let's invert it again and go back home to the F chord. Okay, great. What about the G major chord? So for the G major chord, there's a G, there's a B, there's a D. So G, B, D are the letters in the chord for G major. So this is a root position. First inversion, put G at the top. Okay, this is the first inversion. Put B at the top of the chord. Okay, second inversion of the G major chord. Let's put D at the top. All right, now we're back home. Okay, for the sixth chord, we'll put the, all right, so this is A minor. So A minor has an A, C, E. Great. And this is the root position. So we want to invert it. So we'll put A at the top now. Okay. So this is the first inversion, second inversion. Okay. And this is the back home to the root on the A minor sixth chord. For the seventh chord, this is the root position. Invert it and put B at the top for first inversion. First inversion. Second inversion by put D on the top and then invert it again. Put F on the top. And now B is the lowest note, so we're back to the B diminished chord and then back home. So as you can see here, all the 7 different chords can be played 3 different ways. In the root position, which is usually always with our thumb, being the lowest note. And then here, let's pay attention to the fingerings here. So when you start out in the piano, this is a good best practice that is generally used for inversion so that it doesn't hurt your hands when you're playing these chords in inversions, okay? So when you're playing, for example, the root position, it is recommended to use the 1, 3, 5 that you see here. So your thumb, your third finger, and your fifth finger, okay? So 1, 3, 5 is the recommended fingers to use for the root position. For the first inversion, 1, 2, 5 are the fingerings to use here for the first inversion. Okay. And then for the second inversion, back to 1, 3, 5. 1, 3, 5. Okay. And then back home for the root, 1, 3, 5. All right. So why is that important? So again, inversions are just another way to give you options to play a chord a different way so that you don't play just one way in root position only, but you can play it 3 different ways. Also, another benefit of an inversion is that it allows you to have efficient movement, okay, when we change chords. So instead of when we play the 1 and 4 chord, so when we play 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. So notice that I have to jump from the 1 to the 4 with my thumb always. So when you play like that, with always in the root position of these chords, it's not necessarily the most efficient way to move your chords. And also, you're more likely to mess up the more you move like that, the more you jump between chords, 1, 4. So prevent jumping or help to prevent making mistakes. Gospel musicians actually use inversions all the time. That's how they really play. They use inversions all the time. Okay. So now notice this smooth movement when I go from the 1 chord to the 4 chord. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. All right. So notice that here I did not jump and put my thumb on the 4 chord, the F major chord. I just put my middle finger here on the 4 and play this inversion. This is the second inversion. So how do I know that? So on the F major chord, I figured out what is the inversion I can use when I'm playing the 1 chord So on the 1 chord, well, first of all, I figured out all my inversions on the F major chord, right? So root, first inversion, second inversion. Oh, look at that. So when you're in the C major root position here, one thing to work on is for all the fingers that are down, right? Your 1, 3, 5. What finger is closest to F, to the 4? Okay, so hopefully you said your third finger, your middle here. So if that's the case, then that means that you can you can play the inversion that uses your middle, okay, which is this inversion here. Okay, so now in this example here, why did the third finger win? Why not the pinky? So the reason why the third finger here won is because it only took a half step. Okay, versus the pinky, which would have to take to get to the 4, or the F note here, the pinky would have to take half step. That's 2 half steps. So on the piano, every note here, when you're going from a note to a note, this is a half step. Okay, so if you go from C to D, that's actually two half steps, which 2 half steps make a whole step. Okay, so how do we get a whole step? When you go from C to this black key here, this is actually called C sharp or D flat, depending on which direction you're moving. Okay, so it's C because since we're going to the right, this will be sharp. Okay, now if we're on D, and if we go back, this will be D flat. Okay, great. They're the same note now. Okay, but the main thing here is that when we go from C to C sharp, this is a half step, and now to go from C sharp to D, this is another half step. That's why this is root, half step, half step. Okay, and then in the same fashion, to go from D to D sharp, this is a half step, and then from here to here is another half step. All right, so now whenever there's no black keys in between the 2 white keys here, then these are just half steps. Okay, but whenever there's a black key in between the 2 white keys, then there's a half step when you play the black key in between. Okay, great. So that's why the third finger won here, is because they only had to take a half step. They didn't have to take 2 half steps like the pinky did here. So half step, half step. All right. Now to play the G major, the 5 chord, when you're in this position, let's look at our fingers here and see what finger is the closest to G or is already on it. All right, so hopefully you said the pinky here is already on G. All right, so the thing to think about here is what inversion should you play to play the G major that uses your pinky. Okay, so let's go and figure out that inversion. So this is G major root position. This is first inversion. All right, this is second inversion. And this is back to root. So which of those use the pinky on your root? Okay, so let's do that again. So for the G major chord, the root is actually being played by my thumb here. So let's invert it. All right, so here my pinky on the first inversion, as you see here. Okay, so here's the root position again. First inversion of the G major chord. So my pinky is actually on the root here. All right, so that's what's actually playing. So the pinky here is actually playing the root of the chord, and that's why you can use this inversion when you're in this position of the 1 chord or the C major chord. Okay, so the exercise here is to figure out what inversion we can use when we are in a position of the 1 chord, meaning when we're in the root position of the 1 chord, what inversion can be used for the 1, 4, 5. Okay, so when we're in this position, we can use just our regular root position of the C major chord of the 1 chord, right? And then to play the 4 chord, so that we don't jump around, we can play this inversion, the second inversion of the 4 chord, the F major, right? You know, when we're in this position, we can play the first inversion of the 5 chord, so that we have efficient movement. Okay. Okay, so I'd like you to, go over this inversion intro and try to figure out how to play all three inversions for all 7 chords, right? So for your C major, figure out the root position of the C major, figure out your first inversion, figure out your second inversion for C major, figure out the 3 different inversions you can play for the C major, and likewise for D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. And then also try to figure out your inversions when you're playing in the root position of the C major. What's your 1 4 5 inversions? Just focus on primarily just your 1 chord, and focus primarily just on the 4 chord to see if you can play that inversion, and then focus on the 5 chord inversion here, just so that you can get used to adding these inversions in your playing. Okay. All right, so today we introduced what inversions are, why they're important, and how we can use them. Hope you found this tutorial to be very helpful, and definitely be on the lookout for more tutorials coming your way. If you found this tutorial to be useful, also remember to like and subscribe.